What do you mean by overdrawn account? Brandon's sister screamed at him, demanding the rent money he had promised her, while I stared at my phone, feigning surprise. That's not possible, I said, my voice steady, though my mind raced. What had he done? When had he done it? I remained calm, giving her the impression that I was just now realizing my husband's betrayal, but not for the reason she thought. My name is Isala Thompson, and my husband Brandon had just made one of the most catastrophic mistakes of his life. Even though I had been expecting it, the cruel note he left on the refrigerator that Sunday morning felt like a slap in the face. Farewell. In any case, I never loved you. Very classy, Brandon. As a forensic accountant in Milwaukee, I had spent the last 15 years uncovering financial fraud for some of the largest companies in the Midwest. Let's just say, when my own husband started showing signs of planning his escape 3 months ago, he didn't realize he was dealing with someone who knew exactly what to look for. The first warning sign was when, after years of letting me manage everything, he suddenly became interested in our finances and began to inquire about our retirement accounts. Then there were the covert phone conversations, the mysterious absences, and the way he would switch the screen on his computer every time I entered the room. Typical indications of someone preparing to flee. In my line of work, I had witnessed it all. Brandon was unaware that I witnessed every questionable transaction, covert purchase, and attempt to transfer our funds covertly. Every action he performed in an attempt to defraud me was recorded, captured on camera, and forwarded directly to my attorney. He thought he had pulled off the ideal escape when he left that note, but I had previously shifted our savings, tagged our accounts, and planned for every possible scenario he would try. I couldn't help but smile as the fraud notifications began to flood my phone that Monday morning. Brandon believed he was 10 steps ahead, but he was unaware that he was putting himself in a dangerous situation. Notifications about refused transactions, unsuccessful withdrawal attempts, and frozen accounts started beeping on the phone. To me, each one sounded like melody. My palm touched the just-in-case folder on my desk, which contained months' worth of evidence that would ruin not only his escape plot, but his entire future. I nearly felt terrible for him as I heard his sister's frantic voice on the phone. Nearly. You may imagine that learning that my 8-year husband had never truly loved me crushed me. The problem with becoming a forensic accountant is that you develop your ability to recognize trends. When people conceal things, they believe they are being clever, but money leaves a trace. Always. Brandon, too? He covered everything with breadcrumbs. 6 years ago, Brandon and I met at a charity gala. He seemed to have his life together, was charming, and was successful, or so he said. He drove a fancy automobile, was a financial advisor, and they discussed creating a future together. His desire and confidence struck me. In hindsight, I should have observed how evasive he was about his past and how he consistently sidestepped inquiries about his clientele. At least I believed that the first 3 years were good. We discussed establishing a baby, planned exotic holidays, and purchased a lovely home in the Milwaukee suburbs. He would become defensive whenever I inquired about his college loans, or he would shift the topic when I brought up meeting his former coworkers. But there were always these minor details that didn't quite line up. You don't believe me? Turning it around on me, he would say, you need to know everything, but why? Do you not believe that I am capable of managing my own finances? Traditional manipulation. In my line of work, I'd witnessed it countless times. People avoiding financial openness by utilizing emotional leverage. However, I chose to overlook it because I wanted to have faith in him and us. My first error was that then I saw the unmistakable indications. He insisted on having different accounts for our holiday expenses last Christmas. He remarked that if we surprised one other, it would be more romantic. However, I saw the credit card statements that he believed he had concealed, which showed purchases made at upscale jewelry retailers. I never got any jewelry, the weekend business trips that I couldn't discover that aligned with any conferences when I was around, the enigmatic calls from numbers that always ended up in voicemail. I'm not like most wives who might have confronted their husbands right away. Rather, I began obtaining bank statements, monitoring transactions, and constructing a case. He was actually providing me with additional proof each time he believed he was hiding anything. I assumed I was unaware of anything as I watched him attempt to gradually deplete our accounts. Once more, you're working late. As I sat at my computer, he would ask, pretending to be concerned. I would respond, just catching up on some cases without bringing up the fact that the case I was working on was his. 3 weeks ago was the tipping moment. My coworker Susan hurried to my desk as I was working late this time. She was holding her phone tightly as if it were about to bite her, and her face was pale. You must see this, Isla, she continued, her voice trembling. I discovered something when going through the Thompson case files. It has to do with Brandon. I stared at her screen and felt sick to my stomach. Brandon's name was there, connected to a string of questionable transactions we were looking into, as a person of interest, not as a victim or witness. His business dealings were exhibiting the same trends that I had been observing in our personal accounts. He was fleeing from something far more significant than simply deciding to leave me. As she flipped through the papers, Susan muttered, "Ugh, 3 other fraud investigations have named him. He chooses successful women, marries them, and then vanishes with their money. New states, different names, but the same MO. Prior to his relocation to Milwaukee, the final one took place in Phoenix. The parts began to fit together. It was all part of his pattern. The charm, the secrecy, the sudden interest in our money. I was his next target, not his wife, and he was unaware that his most recent mark was an expert in apprehending those who were just like him. I sat in our kitchen until the sun came up that night, reviewing everything from a new perspective. It was all so obvious now. The kind spouse act, the deft manipulation, the way he had gradually attempted to distance himself from my friends and family. It was so ironic that I couldn't help but chuckle, not because it was humorous. He had chosen the wrong woman to defraud. I prepared for the next 3 weeks. As if nothing were wrong, I would kiss him goodbye every morning. I would record every questionable transaction while listening to his fabrications about his job every night. I transferred our funds, got in touch with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, and collected proof that would help his former victims as well as safeguard me. He looked at my face one night and observed, "You seem different lately. Is everything all right?" I grinned as I considered the trap I had built and how his own conceit would ultimately lead to his demise. "Just exhausted from work," I said. "This time of year, you are aware of how things may get." He nodded empathetically, presumably believing that I was putting in a lot of effort to increase my income so he could steal more. He may have spotted the glitter in my eye, which indicated that I was well aware of his plans if he had been more attentive. Brandon and other con artists, however, never imagine that they will be the ones defrauded. The problem with those who make a living by deceiving others is that they don't anticipate being the ones being played. His plan began to take shape the morning after Brandon vanished, just as he had anticipated. Our bank was the first to call. Credit cards maxed out, unusual activity, and repeated withdrawal attempts. His sister Kelly, who was furious over the money he had borrowed, gave him the second. The third came from Rachel Clark in Phoenix, who wanted to know whether I knew the whereabouts of her husband, her spouse. Like a pail of freezing water, the words struck me. "Please tell me what you said." I sat down at my kitchen table and tightened my hold on my phone. "Brandon Murphy." With an angry tone, Rachel clarified that he was still legally her husband. 3 years ago, he vanished with my savings. Since then, I've been following him. Despite myself, I grinned. "In fact, he went by Brendan Thompson here. You won't believe it, but I've been anticipating your call." Rachel and I compared notes throughout the course of the following hour. The same endearing grin, the same tale of the investment advisor, the same practice of gradually depleting funds before vanishing. However, there was one significant distinction this time: me. I told her I needed your help to apprehend him, but I have enough proof to bring him down. At that moment, a text message from Brandon buzzed through my phone. "Sorry, is it possible for us to have one final conversation?" Excellent. Following the pattern I found in Rachel's case, he was attempting to manipulate his way into one more opportunity to obtain any money that remained after the original disappearance. My lawyer was already planning our reaction when I showed him the text. With sparkling eyes, she murmured, "Let's set the trap." I consented to meet Brandon in a downtown coffee shop. He was there when I got there, looking suitably repentant. He was the epitome of a man who had made a grave error. His eyes were red, his clothing were a little rumpled. He started by grabbing my hand across the table and saying, "I'm so sorry. I've been dealing with some terrible investments and other stuff. I simply went into a panic." Playing my part well, I withdrew my hand. "Brandon, how much trouble are you in?" I saw the little glimmer of light in his eyes. He believed I was being duped, but I have a plan to correct everything, and it will cost about $200,000. All I need is access to our emergency savings account. I watched him writhe, pretending to think about it. "You mean The emergency money that you attempted to deplete yesterday? Before he recovered, his expression slumped for a brief moment. It was an error. I wasn't really thinking. But I swear, if you assist me now, to what end? To vanish once more, or like you did to Rachel and Phoenix, to remain long enough to deplete my accounts? He lost the color in his face. Brandon Thompson, or Murphy, or whoever his real name was, appeared truly surprised for the first time since I'd known him. I went on to say, the funny thing is that I slid a folder across the table. You might have discovered that stealing from a forensic accountant wasn't the best course of action if you had done your homework. At that moment, 2 FBI officers came to our table. I straightened my jacket and got to my feet. And Brandon, too? You may wish to give a lawyer a call, a decent one. My phone flared up with a call from Susan as the FBI agents carried Brandon away. She couldn't have come at a better time. We have him, she declared in a victorious tone. The team has just completed its analysis of the offshore accounts you reported. Brandon is not merely a marriage scammer. He has been running an enormous Ponzi scheme. Millions of dollars in fraud are at stake. I saw Brandon being loaded into a federal van through the window of the coffee shop. He no longer resembled the self-assured man who believed he had outwitted me. He was little now. What is the number of victims? I knew the response would be unpleasant, so I asked, 5 states and 23 thus far. 12 weddings, all to prosperous financial ladies. Here's the worst part, though. He had a more ambitious strategy. We discovered proof that he was establishing a new investment company. He intended to attract wealthy clientele by using your reputation and credentials. He would suddenly demonstrate interest in my profession by asking about my cases late at night, and I reflected on those times. And he wasn't encouraging, he was gathering information in preparation for his largest fraud to yet, which would take advantage of my professional reputation. The irony, I remarked, is that he may have escaped once more if he hadn't become avaricious and had simply continued his typical marital fraud, but he simply had to go bigger. Susan said, and that's not even the best part. Do you recall last year when he insisted on joining a country club? It turns out that he was using it to get close to the hedge fund manager, Caroline Mitchell, who was his next target. The foundation for his next disappearance act was already being laid. I remembered the late-night networking events and the Sunday golf outings. He was preparing his next victim while he was at home playing the loyal spouse. Caroline Mitchell, however, wasn't your typical hedge fund manager. She was one of my best friends, and for months, she had been collaborating with me to record Brandon's every action. I said, let me guess, did Caroline allow you to listen in on all of their private chats? Every recorded chat in the club lounge, every text message, and every email. In an attempt to woo her, he really gave us a blueprint of his whole business. The man essentially built our argument for us. I couldn't contain my laughter. Brandon believed he was the smartest guy in the room and had spent months carefully organizing his departure. Spanish was the only. In the meantime, everyone he believed he was controlling had been cooperating to create a strong case against him. Has his sister Kelly gone back to you? Considering her desperate call this morning, I inquired. Susan said, that's another interesting thread. It turns out that she isn't actually his sister. She is complicit. For years, they have been conspiring to run this hoax. She pretends to be his needy sister in order to justify his urgent need for a loan just before he vanishes. As we speak, she is being picked up in Chicago. I reclined in my chair and absorbed everything. Brandon's blindness was as astounding as the extent of his deceit. He had been so preoccupied with keeping his lies true that he had failed to see the trap that was closing in on him. Susan continued, we discovered who he really was. He is neither Murphy nor Brandon Thompson. This is Brandon Roberts, who has been wanted in Canada since 2015 for fraud. As I considered the enormous case file that was awaiting me on my desk, I grinned. Welcome to your worst nightmare, Brandon Roberts. My phone buzzed once again, just as I was ready to return to the office. It was an SMS from an unidentified number this time. You don't know what's going to happen, but you think you're smart. Examine your email. An email with extensive pictures of myself, with my family, my everyday activities, and even pictures taken through my house windows was sent after the message. Anger, not fear, was what sent a shiver down my spine. Someone had been paid by Brandon to keep an eye on me. I called the FBI agent handling Brandon's case after forwarding everything to Susan and my attorney. Morrison, agent, another participant has entered the game. I'm already on it, she said. James Foster, Brandon's old cellmate from a brief stay in Phoenix, sent the pictures using an IP address we've been keeping an eye on. As Brandon's muscle, he has been intimidating victims who approach too closely in order to reveal the plan. I wondered whether this was the reason Rachel Clark had been silent for so long. Now, where is he? The problem is that we can't find him, although he's most likely in mid-sentence. Agent Morrison paused. Hold on. One of Brandon's frozen accounts is moving. It's being attempted to be accessed from throughout your home, my home, where my laptop was left open. I gave Rachel a call right away. Is everything in order over there? She murmured. We have a situation. Kelly is present. Apparently, she had a key. She is attempting to use your computer to access Brandon's accounts. The fictitious sister Kelly was allegedly being held in Chicago. My thoughts whirled over the potential. She had either gotten away or... Now leave there, Rachel. Kelly isn't working by herself. A crash sounded in the background, and then I heard Rachel take a short inhale. Foster is also here, too late. My head was clear, but my heart was racing. This was just the kind of desperate action I had expected. Do you recall what we talked about, Rachel? The time has come. I heard Rachel's cool voice over the phone. Hey, Kelly, you might want to take a look at what's on that screen before you make a foolish decision. Knowing exactly what they were observing, I grinned. Not all of the evidence, accounts, or files were simply kept on my laptop. The entire house was being watched, with agents positioned close by, and everything was being live-streamed to the FBI servers. I heard Rachel remark, "It's over. Gaze outside." As FBI agents flooded my home, sirens blared in the background. Rachel was safe, and Kelly and Foster were taken into jail in a matter of minutes. Agent Morrison was waiting for me when I got home. That was quite a show, she said. You anticipated that they would attempt this? At the end, people like Foster, Kelly, and Brandon always become desperate. They can't cope with losing control since they're so accustomed to it. I glanced at my home, which is now the scene of a crime. All I had to do was give them the impression that they had one final chance to prevail. We can now add witness intimidation and conspiracy charges to their list in light of the threats and the attempted break-in. Agent Morrison grinned. I think your trap was a complete success. I imagine Brandon sitting in his cell, likely still holding on to the hope that he could negotiate his way out of this. He was unaware that his last-ditch effort had just provided us with all the information we required to make sure he would never defraud anyone again. I watched Brandon's entire existence fall apart in front of me in the courtroom 2 months later. As the judge gave down his punishment, the self-assured smile vanished to be replaced by a look of complete defeat. Brandon Roberts, you have been sentenced by this court to 25 years in federal prison for numerous counts of fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, and witness intimidation. As they brought him away, he looked at me. His mask briefly came off entirely, allowing me to see the panic underneath. The man who had left a letter in my refrigerator that said, "Never loved you anyway," now had to deal with the future in which love was the least of his worries. Foster and Kelly fared no better. Despite accepting plea bargains, both would still receive lengthy sentences. They exposed activities in 3 nations and presented evidence against Brandon's whole network as part of their agreements. As Brandon's victims, my unexpected sisters in survival, rose one by one to give their impact statements, Rachel sat next to me and squeezed my hand. Though their tales of treachery were similar, each woman concluded on a triumphant note. In addition to justice, we had regained our authority. Agent Morrison smiled as he came up to me after the sentencing. Your expertise would be useful to the Bureau. P, have you ever thought of serving as our consultant? I considered all the other Brandons, all the con artists who believed they were too cunning to be discovered. What do you know? I believe I would enjoy that. Yes. I felt lighter than I have in years as I stepped outside the courthouse into the brilliant Milwaukee sunshine. Although Brandon believed he had ruined me, he had actually strengthened me. I now had a new goal: to make sure he would be the last con artist to undervalue a lady with a knack for math and a sense of fairness. I appeared at a podium in a crowded conference room at the FBI's Financial Crimes Division in Milwaukee 6 months after Brandon was sentenced. A presentation explaining what they now refer to as the Thompson case, which was neither his nor my real name, was behind me. I had reverted to using my given name since I didn't want to be associated with any of Brandon's false identities. I told the group, full of analysts and agents, that the modern con artist doesn't carry a gun. They employ technology, deceit, and trust. They all leave a trace, though. All you need to do is know where to look. Results were already being seen from the program I had created with the FBI. In just the last month, 3 significant romance scam networks had been exposed. Rachel's expertise helped us learn how these predators selected their victims, making her one of our most useful consultants. I discovered a message from Susan on my phone after the session. Brandon has found another of his victims in Vancouver. She had lost everything: her home, her savings, her business, while the rest of us still held on to what we had. Yet, this time, there was hope. This time, we could help her reclaim what had been stolen. Brandon's encrypted data had finally been cracked by the forensic team, revealing hidden accounts he had meticulously concealed around the globe. I couldn't help but remember that painful Sunday morning when I had discovered his cruel message. He had tried to break me with 5 words, but instead, he had given me a gift: the chance to help others fight against people like him. That night, sitting on the balcony of my new apartment, I couldn't help but marvel at the irony. From this view, I could see the calm waters of Lake Michigan stretching out before me, as peaceful as my thoughts had become. After spending his life taking from strong women, Brandon had unwittingly created something far more powerful: a network of survivors, women who had endured and were now determined to bring down men just like him. Survival isn't always the sweetest form of revenge. Sometimes the greatest vengeance comes from thriving. If you're drawn to stories of resilience and justice, be sure to subscribe to the SoraBook channel and stay tuned for more fascinating stories in the upcoming videos.